responsibility to be hosting today's webinar. I apologize for technical difficulties. I'm actually doing it today from my home. Janet's actually in Oregon. Erica, who is manning the Q&A and chat, she's in Jefferson City. Just like housekeeping items, participants are muted upon entry. It is suggested that you mute your own line as well. If you're using a headset with your computer and do not have sound, you need to check that you are connected to the correct audio source, as your default may be set to something different than your headset. The for today have been uploaded to the resource website. That website should have been sent to all participants on Tuesday. We do have archived recordings as well as transcripts of each of the webinars, and that website to access the archived recordings as transcript should have been shared on Tuesday as well. Next week's registration will be sent on either Monday or Tuesday, and week we will also review the on-site training and ensure that we have everybody connect appropriate on-site training venue. And just a few reminders, if you actually have questions, please put those in the question and answer box. If you're having technical difficulties, please enter those in the chat screen. And with that, I will turn it over to Janet Stebley, Senior Consultant with Griffin Hamilton Associates, to begin today's webinar.
Okay, and can everyone hear me? Just a quick check. Okay. Yeah. Thanks. Good morning, and welcome to the second webinar. And just as we get started, I thought I'd just do a quick recap of webinar number 1, because in webinar number 1 we did an overview of customized employment, which, remember, the customized employment is an employment situation that benefits both the employee and the employer. So it really gets at that win-win idea, in the sense that it really matches the job seeker's interests, skills, and ideal conditions of employment, but it also meets one or more identified needs of the employer. Custom employment is also very individualized. It's one person, one job, so we're not looking at group settings or group placement anyway. And it's also negotiated, meaning that some negotiation has occurred to make it fit the person's ideal conditions of employment. So if it's not individually negotiated, it's likely not custom employment. It might be competitive employment if people are just, kind of fitting into the existing job description, but it's probably not customized, and maybe it doesn't need to be. So customized employment is really for those people who don't fit to the existing job description and need sort of a different approach to make employment work for them. In week 2, we also talked about 4 potential outcomes of customized employment, being negotiated jobs, which could be some negotiating jobs, maybe carving the job around the existing job description, figuring out which pieces people can do. It could also be job creation, looking for opportunities to create jobs based on employer needs. Also talked about resource ownership as another potential outcome of customized employment, which again, the negotiated job with the job seeker is bringing something to that employment situation that create the work for them, something usually like a piece of equipment, or maybe it's some specialized training. We also talked about a couple of different self-employment options, including micro-enterprise or very small businesses, idea of a business within a business, where there's a small business that actually is based in a host business that, again, help that business by sharing a common customer base and offering kind of complementary products and services. Those other 3 outcomes, resource ownership, micro-enterprise, and business within a business, probably less common. I think most of the work we do around customized employment is around negotiated jobs. But while it's common, I often find that when employment specialists feel stuck, that's kind of what gets them over the hump and gets them thinking about strategies that will get to that win-win. With employment, again, we're not so much looking at a business's need or an employer's need, but we're looking at community needs. So community needs that might be met that will match that person's ideal conditions of employment. So that was just a quick recap of Webinar 1. Okay. On Webinar 2, get the slide downstairs, what we'd like to cover, and actually we're focused on discovery today, or that first step in customized employment, and really we're going to be covering that the next 2 webinars. So today is Discovery Part 1, next week will be Discovery Part 2. And what we'll be covering are some of the key elements of discovery, an overview of the steps in discovery, and then into a little more detail on some of the initial steps, being home and neighborhood observations, interviewing others, and called discovery activities or skills and ecological fit. Objectives today are that participants will be able to describe some key elements of discovery, to describe some initial steps involved in a discovery, and to actually be able to conduct a home and neighborhood observation, as well as interview relevant people in the job seeker's life. So, and also to identify discovery activities that relate to a job seeker's interests, skills, and conditions of employment. So we're really just focusing on those first steps of discovery today. Some of the key elements of the discovery process, I already say first, traditional assessment processes some have focused on point in time data, like we're assessing the person one particular point in time. You know, maybe it's on test day or on evaluation day, which I all know, we all have good days and bad days. So how we perform on one particular day may not be really representative of how we perform overall. Traditional assessment processes also have tended to be comparative in the sense that they compare people against one another or against some norm. So how we do in comparison to the the general population has been one of the focuses of traditional job assessments. But with discovery, we're using more of a qualitative approach. And some of the qualitative research, we're focusing more on things like interviews and observations, anticipation with the employment seeker in a number of different settings. Also, review of records, and excuse me, the ringing will stop in just a second. I thought I had that fixed. I apparently didn't. So looking at things like interviewing people that can provide information on people's interests and when people are at their best, and people in different settings that get at what's important to people and what skills they have and what they need to learn. So that's the kind of activities that we do in discovery to figure out people's interests, skills, and conditions of employment. It's in discovery, when we're recording that information, we want to be descriptive rather than evaluative, in the sense that we're recording what we actually observe people doing without adding a lot of our own opinions about, what that means or how they're doing. So we're really just describing what we see. We're very optimistically focused. And I say, like we have to be Pollyanna or anything, but we want the information that we collect to be very focused on what would make that person successful in an employment situation. Discovery should never result in a decision that people are unemployable, but rather we want to describe the situation that would make them employable, right? The situation that would make them most successful. And information is collected over time, so it's not point in time. It's collected over time, so we get a general sense of who that person is over time. Discovery. When we think about customized employment in the purpose of, we're seeking to find employment opportunities that really fit the person, then the question is, who is this person? And who is this person right now? Not, who is this person once they gain more skills, or who is this person once they figure their hygiene problems, or we're going to take where the person is right now and work things around that. So the goal of discovery then will be to develop a profile that will guide job development, and oftentimes that profile is called a profile. In the example that I put into the materials today, it's called a discovery staging record, but I'll tend to generically refer to it as a profile or vocational profile. And it's used to information that's gleaned from discovery. It's to collect that information, which is then will inform job search. So as discovery, profile again, or the staging record, is that document that's going to, it's going to be the place where we collect the information, but it also helps us guide the process. So if you really are looking at the form and the format, it kind of walks you through the steps so you know what needs to happen next. And like I say, there's different versions of vocational profiles. Hammett's version, which I shared with you today, is called the Discovery Staging Record, and they refer to discovery as the Discovery Personal Genius. But Gold and Associates has a slightly different format. I know some of you are involved with the IPS model, some of you in mental health field, individual placement and support model, and there's a different vocational profile that people use. So you know that there's different formats for it, but it's a place where the information from discovery is meant to be collected. And generally speaking, with the format provided in probably most forms, that they're be completed electronically. So sometimes while you might see a very small space, it's really like to print out these forms, because sometimes people see a small space and they expect that it's supposed to be a short answer, when really it's not. It's meant to be a place where you gather a lot of rich information that can be used to help with job search. So the thing I find a lot of times is that as people walk through the steps in discovery, they schedule time for the different pieces and different activities, but often they don't schedule time to actually complete the staging record. And if I don't write stuff down fast, it gets forgotten. So as we're going through this, remember to make time in your schedule, actually record the information that you're gathering. It's super important. So let's pocket for a couple of polling questions, and we decided after last chat we're going to make these quick. We're only going to give you like 20 seconds to respond. First, polling question about what is the goal of discovery, and you'll go over to your right. You can check the boxes, but A is to find the one best possible job for that individual. B, identify whether the person is employable. To explore who the person is right now, or all of the above. A few seconds to respond here. We're going to go fairly quickly. And while responding to that, I'm going to go on to another question. You'll see the questions on the right side here too. But the question too is discovery might include A, participation in activities with job seekers. B is in direct observation. C, inventories. D, labor market research. This gets tricky. And C, or A and B. I'll just give you 1 second to do that. Close the door while I was doing that. Okay, so I'm going to go back for a second. There we go. To one, I see the bar graphs coming up. Speaking what you guys said with C, to explore who the person is right now. Exactly. The reason we say, and I know it seems a lot of these would be appropriate answers, but let's take one at a time. First one about the one best job. Actually, what we hope to get from discovery is a whole array of jobs that might be good starting places for this person. I think when we started like person-centered planning, we really focused effort on figuring out what the person's dream job was, And let me tell you, nothing wrong with dream jobs, but probably all had this experience, is that sometimes the dream job isn't really attainable for the person or attainable right now. Or I always tell people, if you ask me what my dream job is, I would tell you to be sitting at a piano bar playing piano with a group of people around me singing. But there's one problem with that, is I only play the piano. I don't really have the skills I need for that job. And there's certainly pieces of that I get out of my current job. You know, for instance, I do a lot of presenting, and it's sort of similar in the way that I feel like it's kind of a performance kind of thing, and people are sitting around looking at me. They don't necessarily sing, but it kind of meets that piece. We're not looking for just one best possible job, but we're looking for just a whole group of ideas, lots of ideas about where people can get into employment fairly quickly, and then kind of sculpt a career from that. Customized employment really focuses on the key components that everybody's employable. We just got to figure out who, you know, what situation is going to fit them the best, and give the right situation that's going to work. One time I was selling a house, and I had somebody come over to do when they appraise your house. And the user said to me, he said, well, you know what the definition of fair market value is, don't you? I said, no, I don't. Well, fair market value is what a willing seller will accept from a willing buyer. And I think that, you know, it strikes me as the same is true for employment. If he's willing to employ somebody and that person up the job, that person's employable. So I don't know until we can really get out there and explore that and figure out, you know, the situation is. But it assumes that everybody's employable. So what we're looking at from discovery is who that person is right now, and what's going to make that work for them. Let's see, from the second question, I don't see. Let's just go ahead and talk about them as they're coming up. So discovery does include a lot of participation.
So it'll be just a few seconds.
Oh, okay. We'll get here. I guess putting two polling questions right together maybe doesn't work. We'll give people minutes to chime in. Go and B. A and right. So yes, A and B, participation in activities with job seekers. Interview and direct observation are definitely part of discovery. So those of you who said A and B, you're right on there. Not to say that interest inventories might not be helpful at getting at some people's interests, but generally not. It's generally not something that's considered a customized approach. So just know that those A and B are the things that were really more that qualitative piece. So as we go through steps in discovery, these are some of the generic steps, and this is just an overview here. So we'll come back and talk about mainly the first three of them today. The last three we'll talk about more next week again. So the basic steps are kind of a home and neighborhood observation, interviewing others, doing some discovery activities, which really are about figuring out what people's skills are and how they might fit into the employment situation. We'll also do some informational interviews or go out and talk to employers and people in the field to get ideas and advice and learn from them where there might be opportunities. It includes some view of records or information that may have been gathered from a variety of sources over time, and ends with that really descriptive narrative about what the person's ideal conditions of employment are. We'll go ahead with that. So that part, and this is usually the start point, is a visit. Especially if the person's new to you, there might be some preliminary steps. You might have done some intake or some, getting to know people, getting through some paperwork. A home visit is typically conducted at the person's home, and you're thinking about a place where people are really comfortable, including people who know the person well, which might include, family, mates, staff close to the person, and gathering those people in the family's home and using a very sort of unstructured interviewing process. And the whole idea here is that we want to have a conversation with people, and we don't want it to be seen as evaluative in any way. We don't want to walk with a checklist or something that makes people feel uncomfortable or feel like they're being evaluated. So we use smooth listening techniques, which is really just asking very open-ended questions or phrasing things in a way that just get people talking. Like, rather than asking a question, I'll say, tell me about da-da-da-da. Tell me about what George does in his free time. So I'm kind of putting it out there in a way that gets people talking. And try to be quiet. Lots of us feel like when we're in this situation, like we have to be in control and we have to be ready to jump in with the next question. But in process, we really want to give people the opportunity to talk. So I'll jump in with a second question real fast. I might be cutting people off. And rather want to sort of pause and be cool with a little silence to see where people go. Sometimes if you write something down or if you respond verbally to what they're saying, that's what they think that you want them to keep talking about. Or I want them to talk about what they want to talk about and what they think is important. So leave the checklist in the office and make it very much a conversation. Because in this case equals, if I'm talking, I'm not learning anything about the person. I need to be listening to the other people who know that person well, to be learning about what I need to know. I say it's just a conversation and we're going to do more listening than talking, but obviously you do need to kind of guide the discussion a little bit. So the information that we're hoping to get at through the home visits are things like interests, skills and tasks, conditions of employment, and who are the people in the job seeker's life. So with interest, I might kind of ask open-ended questions about people's hobbies or activities. I might say, well, tell me about what George does in his free time. Things that just get people talking about what's important to George. But I'm also observing as I go, like what kinds of things are around the house that might give me an indication of what George is about. Oftentimes, especially if people are living in family situations, in the living area are kind of generic, whereas that people might keep in their bedroom are more personalized. So this sounds kind of weird, a bedroom visit. But often what we do is kind of a easy way is try to see the person's bedroom, because it's where people tend to keep things like pictures or things that deal with hobbies or things like that, especially in a family situation. So I'd say something like, oh, show me my house. And it might just be kind of a natural part of the tour of the house. Or people might keep things in other areas of the house too. But what we're looking for are things like collections, things that indicate, it's like if you're in my bedroom, you'd see things like cooking magazines and crossword puzzles and things that give you a little bit of an idea of the things they like to do. And I think if you have kids, think about your kids' bedrooms. What are things that they might keep in their bedroom that indicate kind of who they are, or what's important to them? We also look at skills and tasks. Maybe asking some open-ended questions around, chores people do at home or responsibilities. And part of that, too, we're not only looking at what they do, but kind of what's needed to perform those tasks, or people learn those tasks, or what's helpful for them. Learn best by demonstration. They learn best, with some pictures. What might be really helpful? At conditions of employment. So those are those things that we really need for people to be successful. What kind of supports might need to be in place, and what things might need to be avoided. So, for instance, if fluorescent lights trigger seizures, or people maybe have allergies that would indicate something that really needs to be avoided. We need to know that so that we're not looking in those areas for jobs. A fourth area we look at during the home visit is people's social capital, or they know who's important to them. And sometimes this information is really helpful in figuring out some of the next steps. For instance, one of the next steps is interviewing others. So we need to know who are those people we're going to be interviewing. We also know who the seeker and their families are connected to, because social connections are the way that lots of us get our jobs. So knowing who those people are and how we tap into them is going to be really important. So information, like I said, we try not to take notes during the home visit, because if you start taking notes, people think, if you start writing down what they're talking about, they think you want them to keep talking about that. And we want the conversation to go where they want it to go. So to not take notes, but that means then is after the home visit, you do get some of that down on paper. So if you can, I think it might be best to, say, take a laptop, or you can get out to the car and start filling out the staging record completely. Or at least what I do sometimes is just do some bullet notes to myself. I can, sketch more later, but at least bullet out the things that I really want to remember. Again, schedule time ahead to do that's going to be important, because something like a home visit might happen at the end of the day when people are off work, or in the evening. So let's think about it. You're really ready to go home too. But if you don't write it down right away, it probably gets forgotten. So make sure that you're capturing it so it can get in the vocational profile in some way. And again, that descriptive versus evaluative. We want to just describe what we saw. So, for instance, instead of saying, it's important to John, I might say, showed me several pictures of his family, which were around the house. So make sure we come back to that. You also, again, use some of that information in next steps. So as we go into the next steps of interviewing others and discovery activities, we're capturing information that will help with that. Now would be a great time for questions. So if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A. Let's see if I'm there yet. Okay. But I wanted to say too, ask a lot about, well, what if you can't do a home visit? And there might be situations where you can't. And I've had, for instance, a gentleman who's for the support agency, and she really just didn't feel comfortable having her coworkers come into the house and doing a home visit. Let's say just somebody's just not comfortable with people coming into their home. All I can say is do the best you can do. So if it's a comfortable environment, another comfortable environment where you could have that same kind of conversation with people who are close to the person, even if it's not in their home. Like, for instance, recently we do a home visit for a young man who was about to leave school. It turned out they lived right next to their church. They were all very involved in the church. Dad worked at the church. So we had a home visit at the church. Now, there's obviously certain things we couldn't do. We couldn't see that room, for instance, but we could certainly ask questions about things that John keeps in his bedroom that might indicate his interest. So do the best you can. Sometimes it's hard to get the people who know the person that's there, And if we can't do that, then we sort of pick up in the next steps around interviewing others. But home visits can be really, really powerful. I'll tell you about one that always sticks out in my mind. It was just the young man and his mother. His name is Shane. And I don't think the home visit was going very well at all. Just mocking, was talking a lot about herself, and I didn't feel like it was really giving me much information about Shane. Shane was in the corner not saying a word, and we probably for an hour or more. I really felt like I wasn't getting any useful information. And sudden, she dropped this comment. She said, "Yeah, and he's kind of a litter bug." I went, "Huh, tell me about that." And like he'll go down to the local Dairy Queen and pick up the parking lot. Does he for that? You know, sometimes they give him an ice cream cone, but he just likes to do that. And I say this was a young man who all the information I'd gotten on about him to that point was that he's non-compliant. He would say no to anything that he asked to do, and that he was his hygiene was very poor. And I'm a developer responsible for finding him a job. And even though he had some good skills, I'm thinking, you know, what am I going to do with somebody that says no to everybody, you know, to any question or any, you know, thing that he's asked to do? But when she told me that, it really kind of helped flip my thinking. To say that he's non-compliant and won't follow directions, but to saying, wow, he's a work situation where he can kind of direct the flow of traffic, you know, that he knows what to do and he can do it fairly independently. And it really changed my whole view of how to go about working with Shane. Okay, no questions in the chat box, so I'm going to keep moving on here. Here's point number 3. Home visits seek to get information on interests, conditions of employment, community, or all above. So real fast, 10 more seconds. While you're pulling next slide, which is innovation. And this app is done in conjunction with the home visit because you're already there in the neighborhood. But the kinds of things that you're looking for in exploring someone's community is, are there people of interest or with neighbors that you may not know about? For instance, recently we were working with this older gentleman, and we found out is that he goes over and helps his neighbor shovel snow off the steps all the time. He just does that as a friendly, neighborly thing. But it was really, really, you know, helpful in figuring out some next directions. Okay, see the poll going on? All of us, super, exactly. That visits are meant to get at all of those things: interests, ideal conditions, skills, and community connections. So very good. So going through the neighborhood observation, you might also kind of try to probe around where people spend their time and money, because that kind of tells you how they're connected to the community. Like if somebody frequents the local coffee shop a lot, or you know, it says something about who they're connected with, things about what's important to them. It might be nearby businesses. You might be looking at resources in the neighborhood, and certainly looking at things like transportation options, like you know, what resources are available for transportations and how people get around. Because if somebody doesn't, their only transportation mode is walking, be really focusing on what's close and what's nearby. So just a feel for the neighborhood if you don't know the neighborhood already. The next step, interviewing others. This is during the home visit. You're probably kind of probed about people who were important in the person's life and people who would have good information about them, who could be full in job creation. So sometimes the people you're interviewing in this steps are people who could not be at the home visit. Might be people like former teachers, for employers or staff that have worked with the person, might be siblings that live away from home, siblings, a variety of people. Just knowing who might have some good information. And then the phone interview, they could be done in person, but typically they're done over the phone just because of distance or just for, sake even. So we're looking at the same kinds of things. We're still looking at interests, skills, and tasks, conditions of employment, and social connections. But we're seeing people on the phone to get more input. And again, trying to use smooth listening as a way to really get people talking, because sometimes you get really varied perspectives. I was really working with some staff that were supporting a young man named Daryl. And when we went home visit with Daryl, really he lives on his own. There were a couple of staff people there, but his mom lives farther away, and his brother lived in town. His brother couldn't come to the home visit. So we did phone interviews with both the mother and the other. It's interesting because the staff knew Daryl really well, and they'd known him for a long time. And they were thinking like, well, there's really not much we can learn about him that we don't already know. But one thing that the mother had said that we didn't think about before for Daryl is she said that at one point he had a work experience where he did some photocopying. We thought about that kind of work for him, but as she said it, we were thinking, he really does like kind of organizing stuff. Maybe the idea of, kind of office work does make sense for him. The other said in the interview is we'd asked her a question just kind of generally about how much she saw him working during the week. And she said about 6 hours a week. There was a lot of issues, and she just saw him working very part-time. But when we talked to his brother, his that kind of organizational work that his mother had mentioned. And in fact, his brother worked in the oil industry. So this was an area that none of us really knew a lot about. Like, for instance, my industry, I can see all kinds of things that Daryl might help me with. He said, we're always needing to photocopy, safety information, that kind of thing, and get it out to people. I could see him doing that kind of work, copying and distributing that as well. And when he asked his brother, how do you see Daryl working? He said, at least half time. At least. So we went from 6 hours a week to 20 hours a week pretty quickly. It's what we like interviewing adult siblings if they'll have them, because they really see the person in a really different light and sometimes have much higher expectations. So this is a really simple but really important step. The next step is the discovery activities.
Janet, I did have a question that came in privately. If you could, let me see what it says. Do you have any examples of vocational profiles that you could share?
I do. That's a good question. Thank you. I put blank discussion staging record in the Webinar 2 materials. But in the Webinar 3 materials, I put one that's filled out. So look at that when we get to next week. You'll see that it's filled out, and they all are going to look a little different. What I tried to show is that sort of the being descriptive rather than evaluative. The sample that I put in there, it's for a man named Wayne, and it's kind of a cool example. And it was a project in Canada where we were working on customized employment with a number of agencies in Canada over a 3-year period. And in the first year with this particular agency, we asked each of the people involved in the project to pick one person to really walk through all the steps with. And so Sarah, the employment specialist, had targeted this man named Wayne. And the reason she picked Wayne, she said, was because she felt like Wayne always got overlooked. And he'd have a lot of family family close by. He lived roommates in a house, but felt like he kind of got overlooked. And he's a pretty cool guy. And I see that through discovery, we found out some really interesting things about him. And Sarah was very creative, like Wayne. He's verbal, but not very talkative. And it was hard to get information about interest from him verbally. What she knew that he loved was movies, and quite a collection of movies, and he had them all organized in a specific way. So she asked him to kind of pull out 10 of his movies and talk about, why he liked those particular movies. There were some things that came out, like he liked animals, a lot more animal movies. One of the things that came out, I think he said hot chicks in a couple of them, but the one that came out is he seemed to really like adrenaline, as we put it, or just, he didn't use that word, but, just sort of the rush from certain movies that, excited him. So I got on this thing about looking about the adrenaline. He also really liked helping people, and it came not only from the movies, but just what people knew about him. It got us exploring in different fields that we probably would have explored. Like, for instance, we started exploring in emergency services. We went to the EMTs, we went to the fire department, and so kind of getting him out and doing some things like that. And actually, one of the things that you'll notice on that particular staging record is it's through the discovery process, but then there's also room, as you get into job development, room to record information on that. And you won't see a lot in Wayne's because he got a job offer based on doing some discovery activities and informational interviews. It's a really cool job. He actually worked for the fire department in a small community. So it was a really cool example. Week's materials. So discovery activities, the purpose of this is to really get people out and doing stuff. For a couple of reasons. But, first of all, it just kind of verifies interest. Sometimes people think they're interested in things that they're really interested in when they go out and do them. But also the main purpose is to observe people's skills and tasks and how they learn. Because as the employment specialist, you're representing that person to an employer, and sometimes employers will ask about, well, can a person do this or can they do that? And you need to be able to know how to respond to that. You have to have some firsthand experience with how people can do that. During the discovery activities, we look for really active participation in the sense that the person has to be doing something. They're not just observing, but doing something. So it's often something that you could take a photo of them doing. It requires a verb, that people are actively participating. I recently was reviewing some discovery staging records for somebody, and the person obviously had a real interest in art, but they said, well, discovery activity, they went to the art museum. But they weren't living there. They were just kind of looking at the art. They already knew they were interested in art. We want to see people doing stuff, and both in familiar environments and unfamiliar environments. So start with familiar environments because that's where people are comfortable and, where they've kind of practiced maybe. So like if somebody says, one of my home chores is I mow the lawn every Saturday. Well, that's really cool discovery activity to see them actually mowing the lawn because there's a lot of skills involved in that. So seeing where their skills are, seeing where support is needed. And that's a familiar environment, but then we might also look in unfamiliar environments because that gives us different information. It really shows us more about how they learn, how they generalize skills, or maybe don't generalize skills, and it connects people with people who have similar interests. And that helps give us advice and into some next steps. So let me give some examples of some discovery activities. And when I met Jennifer, she told me that she was very interested in working with young children. She actually just enrolled in an early childhood class at the community college. And the goal was to work with young children and maybe even one day start a daycare center with her sister. And I'm thinking, okay, well, Jennifer has a pretty specific goal already. There's really no need to do discovery because she's already on a career path here. But we sort of backed up and said, well, maybe it wouldn't hurt to get her out and just see how she's around kids, see what skills she has. And so we set up a discovery activity at a local YMCA with a class of kids that were kind of 4 or 5 years old. And what Jennifer learned is that she doesn't want to be around kids at all. I mean, Jennifer has brittle bone disease. Her bones break easily. She gets sick easily. And, of course, the kids were very interested in her wheelchair and were kind of coming up to her and got all over her. And she said, ick. I don't want to get sick. I don't want to end up in the hospital. I don't want to have anything to do with these kids. So sometimes discovery activities can just kind of verify interest or non-interest in this case. An example of Heidi, and the employment specialist working with Heidi had from the home visit interviews that she was interested, she liked taking pictures. And she thought as a discovery activity, she just might take her out to the park and take some pictures and see what happened. And since this stage feels a little weird to people because it just seems like hanging out, hanging with people, but hanging out with intent. We're really looking for skills that people have. She was on the autism spectrum, and one of the things that she did all the time was kind of flap her hands, a lot of hand flapping behavior. But when she went to the park that day with the employment specialist to take pictures, all the hand flapping stopped. So the specialist thought, well, that's really interesting. Like, shocked. She seemed calmer, and she got some idea about her skills about taking the pictures. But as soon as she said, okay, we need back in the car and go back now, all the flapping started again. Is that it wasn't really about the picture taking, it was about outside. When outside, she was calm, she wasn't hand flapping, and what later, she said, I worked with her in the sheltered workshop. I never see her outside. So this was learning something totally new about Heidi, even though she knew Heidi fairly well and had known her for a long period of time. So as they went into job development, they developed a job for her that was outside as a nursery that was just something they hadn't even thought of before. So about discovery activities, or even prior to discovery activities, as you're going through the home visits and you're interviewing others, some of the things that you're looking at are kind of emerging interests or themes. And when I say themes, what I mean is kind of broad that might include tons of job descriptions. So let's say if somebody's interested in dogs, the broader theme might be animals. Because if someone has the skills and interest in working with dogs, likely they have kind of those same skills might be applied to cats or horses or other animals. So that would say themes, that's what I mean. So in this case, this one had sort of emerging interest in themes around, first of all, sort of fishing aquariums. They like fish. And like hammers and tools. And also seemed to have some interest in travel maps and brochures. So those were just kind of some things that were popping up. So when you think about, well, okay, where might we schedule discovery activities? What might that look like for that person? And I'm showing a chart here now that shows on the left-hand side kind of each of those emerging themes, the fishing aquariums, hammering tool use, and travel map brochures. And what that might look like both in familiar environments and unfamiliar environments. So let's take fishing aquarium. When I have fish, I first of all say to myself, well, what do people do with fish in terms of like work? What do people do with fish? So I think, well, people catch fish, they clean fish, they feed fish, they clean fish, they tag, I live in Oregon. That's a big thing here, tagging fish. They tie flies. They might make fishing poles. They might do, I don't know if you've been to fairs where they do the fish pong thing where you hit the ping pong in the fish bowls. There might be the cook fish. There might be all kinds of things people do with fish. So then say, well, what serve in a familiar environment? Well, if someone has an aquarium at home, maybe cleaning the fish tank at home or feeding the fish. That's a very familiar setting. But an unfamiliar setting, I might say, well, what about feeding the koi at the local pond supply? Maybe there's something I could do out in the community in an unfamiliar environment to kind of see that person in a different light and how they learn skills in a different way. I see a question in the chat box that says, do you get employers to let you set up places then to do tasks so you can observe? And yes, we do. We, in this case, asked the koi or the local pond supply store. I might just say, hey, I'm working with this man, and we're developing a career plan, and we need some help. He's got some interest in fish, and I'm just trying to get an idea, like what some of her skills are. Which kind of, if we just kind of came in and and I might ask for a specific task, or I might ask for their input, like what are things that happen there that we might be able to assess his skills on. And I approach it like this is part of an assessment. We get an idea of what skills are, and really an opportunity to just see how interested he or she might be in this particular field. So you'll see some examples there on the hammering tool fence as well. Like you might say, if somebody likes to hammer or use tools, I got to go around on my fence and hammer in the nails that have been poking out. So that would be an easy, familiar task that's easy to set up. But on the other side, maybe using an electric sander or some other kind of tool at a local business. So in my community, there's this place called Sawyer's Oars and Paddles that they make oars and paddles out of wood, and I imagine they use electric sanders there. And I happen to know the owner, so I might set that up there. So use your own social capital or using the person's social capital to set up those kinds of activities. Also using team member social capital. So if there's somebody on the team that might be able to help you set that up, a really good thing to get team members involved in the process. So discovery aids might include A, observing someone in a setting of interest to them, B, doing something active that you could take a picture of, C, going to a museum, or D, none of the above. Pause for just go fast. Four more seconds. Okay, we'll turn the poll here. I like these polling questions because I like the idea of people, getting to do something active. Well, because it's hard to sit at a webinar for long periods of time. Yeah. Okay, let's look at this one. We want to observe people in settings of interest to them, for sure. And I'm sorry, this probably doesn't let you mark two things, but we want to see them doing something active. So like say if somebody is interested in sports, we don't want to see them like say at a football game. We want to see them doing something at the football game. So when you think about it, if people work in the area of sports, what might they do at a football game? Well, gee, they might get tickets, they might work the concession stand, they might pick a litter after the game, they might support the team in some way, bringing water, or things like that. So really, it's true, we do want to observe people in settings of interest to them, but B is really what we need, is we need them to be doing something active that we can take a picture of. That's something we can take a picture of is because as part of discovery, you might put together a representational portfolio that actually would show people what people can do. Oops, I'm going to go ahead here. I'll tell you about Daryl. This was Daryl who I talked about before, who we talked to his mother and brother. And when we talked to the brother, and he had indicated that in the business that he was in, there were things he could see Daryl doing. So we actually asked the brother, could we set up a discovery activity in your business? In an office kind of stuff, and what we expected to see was photocopying or, stapling, things like that. But what he actually had him do was working on spreadsheets. So in the oil industry, people have to have all kinds of certifications that have to be updated frequently. So the brother had set up the task where Daryl was going through and working on an Excel spreadsheet to identify when people needed to have certain certifications updated. I got to tell you, the staff was blown away with the skills that he had on the computer and what he was able to do. So it really, it kind of raised the bar completely for things that he might be doing. He also did some other discovery activities, like in the public library and at this recreation center, because he also had an interest in working with children. But it was really cool and these were staff that thought they knew him really well, but saw a whole new side of him. So and with discovery activities, make sure observing skills and tasks. And sometimes the question comes up, well, like how many discovery activities we do? I would just say enough to understand the person's skills and abilities. If they have a few different themes, which we encourage people to do, to have look at a few different themes, try to do some in each category. Also, don't make it so difficult that it won't get done. If you say, well, we're going to set up a discovery activity that's going to take 4 months to set up and involve, going through a whole bunch of clearances with different department head people, I'll never get it done. So don't make it too hard either. And take photos as you go, because the photos might be very useful later in putting together a portfolio and or demonstrating to people on the team what people's skills, and it might be the funder, it might be the rehab counselor, it might be family members that you need to show, or it may be a future employer that you're trying to highlight people's discoveries. So it's one closing thought. If you didn't learn anything new in discovery, then you really didn't do discovery, did you? You want to get there and do some things that you're going to learn something new from the person. Oh, we're going over a second. I'm sorry we didn't get to questions here, but you'll have some evaluation questions that pop up. But just quickly, let me tell you the assignment. A blank discovery staging record in your materials for today. So look that over if you can. Also, there's an assignment, and there's a printout that you can, that kind of is a cheat sheet. What it asks you to do is to either conduct a home interview or to interview someone else over the phone about a specific person that you're helping to find a job. Now, I understand that some of you may not be, an employment specialist or doing direct services. So you can team together with somebody. In fact, I think that's really preferred. It's fun to work on together, and you get different responses. So if you're a supervisor, team one of your employment specialists. You try to learn something new, and if you can, try to record it in the discovery staging record. So review smooth listening and record what you observe, and that is the assignment. So if there's any questions, again, I'll be on for a moment, and I understand if people have to sign off, but thank you again, and we'll talk next week. And there's some materials for next week in the link as well. So if people have questions, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Janet. This concludes our second webinar on customized employment. Please remember to complete the survey at the end. There will also be a link that you'll receive for webinar 3, and an email that should be coming out shortly, and for you to register for the live training, which will be offered in Jefferson City, St. Louis, and Kansas City. So thank you all for joining us today, and we look forward to your participation next week.